if it wasn't clear already that Pennsylvania may decide the election, it was definitely clear tonight, because both candidates were in that crucial state tonight. We, of course, were playing a portion of the vice president's remarks. She just wrapped a speech in Erie. It is a town that has an eerie history, by the way, of predicting the winner of the election. So just note that. Note it down for November 5th. And with 22 days to go before the election, Kamala Harris definitely ratcheted up the stakes to about an 11 in the last half of that speech. And she did that in a fairly unique, kind of remarkable way by using Donald Trump's own words against him and playing his words at her own rally.
We know who Donald Trump is. He is someone who will stop at nothing to claim power for himself. And you don't have to take my word for it. I've said for a while now, watch his rallies. Listen to his words. He tells us who he is. And he tells us what he would do if he is elected president. So here tonight, I will show you one example of Donald Trump's worldview and intentions. Please roll the clip.
The worst people are the enemies from within.
The enemy from within. Those people are more dangerous, the enemy from within, than Russia and China.
These people should be put in jail the way they talk about our judges and our justices. Now, if you had one really violent day, one rough hour, and I mean real rough.
I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military.
So you heard his words. You heard his words coming from him. He's talking about the enemy within Pennsylvania. He's talking about the enemy within our country, Pennsylvania. He's talking about that he considers anyone who doesn't support him or who will not bend to his will an enemy of our country.
Now, it's very easy after nearly a decade to get numb to this stuff. But the whole point there is Kamala Harris is doing her best to make sure people don't get numb to it. Now, as for the content of his remarks, it's important to point out that Trump's fascination with using the military against what he calls the enemy from within, the enemy within, isn't new. I mean, remember back in the summer of 2020, then President Trump wanted to unleash the troops on racial justice protesters. His own former defense secretary, Mark Esper, quotes him as asking, quote, "Can't you just shoot the protesters? Just shoot them in the legs or something?" Then a few months later, after he lost the 2020 election, he, of course, drafted an executive order to have the military seize voting machines as part of his effort to overturn his loss. And he's openly mused about military tribunals for his political opponents, like for, say, former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney. This has all been bouncing around his head for a while, is my point. So, of course, we should take him seriously. I was just talking with Stacey Abrams about this. When he says he wants to use the armed forces against his perceived enemies from within, which is why we say that a lot on this show. Listen to what he has to say. He's telling us what he's going to do. The problem is far too many people still are not taking him seriously. Many voters are rationalizing Trump's rhetoric and affording him a kind of a form of benefit of the doubt, you can call it. The New York Times put it this way. A lot of people are happy to vote for him because they simply do not believe he will do many of the things he says he will. Too many voters have been lulled into a form of justification in supporting Trump. But there is a whole lot of evidence that Trump actually does what he says he is going to do. I mean, he said he might not accept the election results in 2020. And when he lost, he refused to accept the results, inciting an armed mob to storm the Capitol in a deadly insurrection. He pledged to investigate his political opponents, and he did weaponize the Department of Justice to that end. He said he would put in place a Muslim ban, and he did institute a Muslim ban. He said he would appoint justices to overturn Roe v. Wade. He did, and they did. So, yes, all the evidence from the last time Donald Trump was president points to the fact that we should believe him when he tells us what he's planning. Joining me now here at the table, former Republican Congressman from Illinois, Joe Walsh, who has since left the Republican Party, and Washington Post opinion columnist Dana Milbank, who's been at both Trump and Harris rallies. Okay, Dana, you've covered a lot of political presidential campaigns, many of Trump, many before it. I just want to start just with the tactic of playing your opponent at your rally. Have you ever seen anything like that before?
I've seen Trump do it to Harris, but
Okay.
something with fracking, not destroying democracy. But we actually had a terrific split screen. We were carrying one here on MSNBC, but Trump was across the state, and I think I actually took a few notes. I think it's educational. While Harris was talking about the very serious threats to democracy, abortion rights, Trump was talking about Hannibal Lecter.
Obviously, his favorite friend.
The threat to take away your gas stoves. He was calling Harris stupid. He was having them play Ave Maria as he talked about the chart that saved his life. And he said, everybody go out and vote on January 5th. So this is a man. So he's saying a lot of
A different approach.
it is a different approach on a different part of the state. I mean, it's often said that he's unhinged, but you have to factor that in because, I mean, he's saying a lot of crazy things about people like us, the enemy of the people, the enemy within. But I think the thing you're seeing most of all about Trump this time around is he just seems to be genuinely off his rocker. And I've even at Trump rallies, I've even talked to his own supporters who kind of see that and are kind of nervous about the direction. So I think it's absolutely right that Kamala Harris is calling this out, and everybody has to be doing this over and over again each time Trump is out there.
They're nervous about it, but we were talking during the break, and obviously I read your pieces, they're still going to vote for him.
Yes.
This is the thing. So this is kind of what I've been mulling about, as I was just talking about before we all started our conversation here, is that, you know, he is going to do what he says he's going to do. There's a bit of a license. I think J.D. Vance is a big part of this strategy of kind of lulling people into it's going to be fine. I know you've left the Republican Party, but what should the Harris team be doing? Is doing this enough? What else should they be doing to elevate this issue in front of voters?
More of this. And I wish she had done this earlier. I'm glad she's doing. Jen, none of this is normal. He's not normal. He is a threat to our democracy. The only shot Trump has to win this thing is if he's normalized, is if he's just a normal whatever Republican candidate for president. He's not. And she's got to make that case. And I loved what she did tonight. You talked about the fact that he said he wouldn't accept the results of the 2020 election, and then he didn't. He's told us he will not accept the results of this election if he loses, and he won't. She has to go after him. She has to jolt the American people, I think, these final 3 weeks, and make clear that he's not normal. This is a legitimate threat. He's trying to scare us into voting for him. That's not who we are.